Record. All right. Well, welcome to our contracts class. Today, we're going to go over the consent to limited representation, as well as dual agency in itself. Right. So, Jennifer, what's dual agency?
When you represent the buyer and the seller.
Right. So when you represent, or when the broker represents the buyer and seller. So, you know, in our KWAZ brokerage, we have, I don't know, 550, 600 agents. If one agent represents the buyer and another of those 500, 600 agents represents the seller, we are technically in dual agency. And so we have some extra things that we got to do. We got an extra form we got to fill out, as well as just some rules of thumb we should follow along.
Hey, Chris, how often does that happen?
I see dual agency, probably 15-20% of our transactions are dual.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It is not uncommon, especially having this many agents. We have a lot that, you know, that don't even know it when the listing goes live, but you know, another one of our agents wants to sell it, and that's great. So that's a lot of them. And then we have a lot of agents that work, I don't want to say wholesale, but they go out and they find their buyers for their listings, you know, land listings or something like that. So they represent both sides a lot. So it does happen quite often.
Awesome.
So
how often do you find that to be the case just by like someone representing at an open house?
that's rare.
Rare. Okay.
Yeah. It does happen. I mean, it definitely, I don't want to say it's never, but it's rare. I mean, the chances of somebody walking into an open house and buying that open house that you're hosting is in the 2 to 3% range. And most of them are represented. So even amongst those 2 to 3%, probably only 25% of those are unrepresented. So
Gotcha.
you have a small little piece of pie that would be a buyer that would walk into an open house unrepresented and buy it. And yet it does happen, right? So it's an outlier, but it does happen, and it's pretty awesome. So, however, any dual agency, whether it's you specifically, single agent representing both people, or the brokerage representing both people, we need to pay attention to a couple of things. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the consent to limited representation here. So let me screen share and pull it in. All right, you guys can see my screen okay? I'm going to go add. Consent to limited rep. That's what it is. So just the name of the form should tell you something. It's not called the dual agency form. It's the consent to limited representation. So that should tell you right now that one, it's consent. They have to give permission. And two, you're not gaining capacity. You're actually limiting your capacity a little bit. Now, why do you think we're limiting our capacity a little bit? Anybody?
Negotiations.
Negotiations, because yeah. Well, why? Tell me a little bit more.
Because you can't disclose as much, like representing both, right?
You are absolutely correct. Now that you have representation on both sides, you kind of have to become Switzerland and be neutral in the middle. You can't disclose that the seller would go down this low or the buyer would go up this high or anything like that to the other side. You got to be this kind of middle agent. So it almost goes as so far as we no longer have fiduciary to either side. Now we owe honesty and that kind of stuff to both sides, but we really have to stay in our bounds. So it does limit your capacity to negotiate. So when you're talking with your client, now typically you're going to represent one side first, and then the other one's going to come along, right? So let's talk about this in a typical listing circumstance, kind of like what you were talking about a second ago. You know, an open house. You represent the seller, so you already have an employment contract and agency with the seller. When you have gone through that agency, the residential, the REID, the election of agency, hopefully you checked the box that not only you're going to represent them as a seller, but you also open up the possibility to represent a buyer in that situation, and you're gonna be able to throw it out there. And so what you want to explain to them is, if a buyer were to come along and they were unrepresented, and they want me to represent them, one, you, Mr. Seller, have to give me permission to do that. If the seller's the first one, or whoever you have your contract with is the first one that allows or disallows this, right? So they have to say, okay, that's fine, right? And in your explanation to them about what this means, it talks about here, like in section 1, I'll make this a little bit bigger here. So duties and limitations. If broker now represents both buyer and seller, both parties understand that neither the broker nor the licensee can represent the interests of one party to the exclusion or detriment of the other party. So they will not, without written authorization, disclose to the other party that the seller will accept price or terms other than stated. Same thing around the buyer. There will be conflicts in duties of loyalty, obedience, and disclosure, confidentiality. Disclosures of confidential information may be made only with written authorization. So you start getting into things that you can and cannot disclose. They're not obligated to disclose that the subject property has been site of natural death, blah, blah, blah. So this is all still part of the, these are things that you cannot disclose. Reasonable skill and care shall be obligated at all times to deal honestly. And the duties of the transaction do not relieve the seller or the buyer from their responsibility to protect their own interests. So just because you're representing them doesn't mean that they get their hands washed of everything. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. So it does start to limit your capacity. You can't, let's give a small little example. Let's say I don't represent both sides, right? I represent the seller. And so I call up that other agent, and that other agent tells me, oh yeah, they just got an inheritance. They're flush with cash. We're looking forward to closing this thing quick. You say, that's beautiful. I can go tell my seller that, and now we can utilize that in our negotiation tactics throughout the transaction, right? So are we going to credit them a boatload of cash? Probably not. If they said that they're flush with cash, let's use their cash instead of my seller's cash. So that kind of little bit of information about their financial places, that when we're not representing both sides, I can bring that and disclose that to my seller. If I represented the buyer and the seller in that same situation, and the buyer told me, oh yeah, we got an inheritance, we got a boatload of cash. Now, since I owe that duty to my seller and my buyer, that confidentiality duty to both of them, I can no longer disclose that to my seller. Right? I can't bring that up because I do have agency with that buyer and I owe them some confidentiality. Does that make sense? I hope that example made sense.
Yeah, I just have a question. Do you ever find that clients have issue with this? Like as a
Sometimes
conflict of
it's
interest?
rare. Typically clients are okay. They don't fully understand it, but when you explain it fully, they get it. And we have had people say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with dual agency. I would say most of that is I'm not comfortable with dual agency with the same agent, right? They want at least another agent so that the one person is not conflicted. And I'll tell you, that is a whole lot easier just in your own brain, to deal with it. When you're dual agent and you yourself are representing both, man, do you have to constantly think about, is that something I can say? Do I have to, your conversations become much less detailed and less involved with both sides because there's so much less that you can actually disclose.
Makes
right?
sense.
You end up becoming a functionary in the transaction, so that you're making sure documents and things like that and timelines are followed and all that, but you can't really lean on one side or the other. So it does start to limit your ability to have those conversations. Any other questions up thus far? No? All right, we're doing good. So other than understanding what you're getting into, the filling out of this form is pretty straightforward, right? You're putting in the subject property, the buyers, the sellers, your brokerage, and there is a selection whether it's one licensee whether it's just you or two licensees, and you need to put those two different licensees with the same broker, right? And then you have get all their signatures. And like I said, whoever you have agency with first initially, they're the ones that have the initial permission grant. You know, they're the ones that say yes or no originally. You should be having some sort of conversation about what dual agency or limited rep looks like when you're in your initial conversations with both your buyer and your seller. So your listing agreement, your listing appointment, and all that kind of stuff. You should be talking about that a little bit. Here, I'll go over to the agency. There's one. This is the normal real estate agency form. So down here at the bottom, you do have, you know, represent buyer as buyer's broker, and then this line 36, show buyer properties list with broker's firm, and that the broker could act as an agent for both buyer and seller. Of course, this would be broker acts as agent. There could be a separate actual sales agent involved, but knowing that it's a single broker that's involved, this is dual agency. So this checkbox line 36 needs to be marked in order to initially open up that ability. I have had agents fill this out, only check line, basically it was line 41 because it was a seller, and not check line 42, and then later want to represent both sides. And when we looked at this, we said, no, they didn't allow you to do that. So you either need to go back and get an addendum and get reaffirmed that you are allowed to represent both sides, or you can't. And that limits, this says shows property or shows seller's property to. So what that really does, if you don't have line 36 or line 42 checked on this one, you can't even advertise your property to anybody in the brokerage. So it severely handicaps your property. So there's no reason not to check line 36 or 42 when you're involved, when you're filling out this here. You want to open that up. It does not automatically allow it. They still have the ability to say, you know what, I don't think I like single agent, dual agency. I need you to go find another agent. And that's fine. Right. So they still have that ability. So there's no reason not to check line 36 or 42. Any questions there? I know I changed documents on you guys.
Nope.
All right. Go back into the consent and limited rep here. Now, what is this is a kind of a trick question. I don't know if we well, we'll see if you guys know this. What is the one instance in which we do not allow single agent dual representation? And this is on a brokerage level. It was in your ICA. Anyone? When it's an owner agent, right? So I don't want you to sell your property and represent the buyer all the same time. That means you're flipped properties. And that extends to if you are an investor in the LLC that owns the property, we don't want you to represent both sides. Why do you guys think that is? Open question. No answers. Risk. So when you think about what the ADRE looks at normal transactions and higher risk transactions and the highest risk transactions, as far as when I say risk, the risk of the customer, now the clients, the average consumer, risk of them getting into something they don't fully know, or being mistreated or not disclosed or anything like that. So your standard two different brokers, run of the mill vanilla transaction, that's the lowest in there, right? Your dual agency with two licensees, same broker, two different agents, that kind of raises that risk, because we now have a single broker involved, and we have to kind of shut down a little bit of our our fiduciary between them. Then above that would be one licensee, single licensee, dual agent. You really have to shut down your disclosure there. So there's a high probability, high chance of there being a leak of something or some information passing through, and standard of care has to be super, super high. And the highest risk level would be not only are you single agent representing both sides, but you also have a financial interest in the property. So you can see how all of those things can stack up, and the ADRE sees that and says that is a super high risk transaction, and we are going to scrutinize that transaction like crazy. And really, when it comes down to it, a year later, one of the sides brings up a lawsuit against the other side. They of course involve us because we were the agent involved. When we go to the ADRE mediation and we talk about our duties and stuff like that, when they see, oh, wait a minute, this was dual agent. Oh, it was dual agent, single licensee. Oh, it was dual agent, single licensee, and that licensee had an interest in the property. Pretty much everything is your fault at that point. I mean, you know, less some egregious stuff, but you own a boatload of responsibility at that point, and that exposes the brokerage up to a tremendous amount of risk. So that's why we don't allow that level of dual agencies. Single licensee, dual agent on an owner agent or a agent has interest in property. We don't like it. If you ever are in that situation, give us a call. You know, we will work something out such that we can limit some of that liability. Any questions on that? Good, I explained it perfectly. I love this.
Well, if because I
There you
have a
go.
rental that's on my mind. If you're a landlord, does that do anything?
Well, if you're a landlord, you typically do not represent the tenant.
So I'm the landlord, the owner, and the agent. So
Right.
they would need
But-
that'd be
but you-
okay, and they
But
need their
you
own
typically
representation.
you typically do not represent the tenant. The tenant is an unrepresented person.
But not for leasing, but if we sell it to them.
If then you represent them as the purchaser, I would say, what would be a good idea with let's go get another agent in our office and have them represent that tenant / buyer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what goes along with these added risk levels, right? When you're going from basic, you know, two sides of the transaction, two agents, two brokers, that's something. When we get into dual agency, whether it's single agent or dual agent, or two agent dual agency, what brokers want to see, what the ADR wants to see, is more and more documentation. So when we're in dual agency, we want to see, what I would really prefer to be in command is like your emails going back and forth. You better have a home inspection. If you don't have a home inspection, you better have them sign the last blank of the second page of the Binzer stating that they are actually refusing to have a home inspection, have that itemized out. We want everything calculated and written and backed up and memorialized and all those other terms, just saying a year from now when it comes up and we have more possibilities of loopholes or punches through if we're not following, if we're not memorializing and getting written consent on everything when we have a dual agency, right? So, you know, worst thing would be dual agent, single licensee, and they waive the inspection. Like, well, everything is going to point to what's the motivation of that agent to talk the buyer into waiving the inspection, right? That's how it's going to come across when we're sitting at a mediation table, right? That buyer is absolutely going to say, oh, well, we thought we wanted an inspection, but the agent said that we didn't need one because he already knew everything about the property. Like you just lined us up for a fairly significant E&O claim. But we have a document that signs saying buyer has been informed that the inspection is of their best interest and they are electing not to, and they sign it. Now we have documentation saying, hey, we told you that you could have an inspection and you made that election to not have the inspection. So we need to absolve that responsibility back onto them using written forms. Does anybody not know where I'm talking about on the Binzer? Everybody already knows what I'm talking about? I guess you do. I'm gonna look it up
Yeah, can you
anyways.
just pull it up real fast?
Yep. Commercial. Residential. October 2022. So the Binzer is a really great helping document that follows section 6J of the contract. And so right here is where you would normally be filling out your elections. But right down here. So this first section right here, buyer acknowledges and says they want to fix all this stuff. This little bit right down here, buyer acknowledges that buyer was advised to obtain inspections of the premise by qualified inspectors and buyer declined. By acting against broker's advice, buyer accepts the responsibility and hereby releases, indemnifies, and hold harmless brokers from any and all liability from all matters that a professional inspections could have revealed. You can see that clause right there has a lot of power in absolving our responsibility if the buyer says that they don't need an inspection, right? So when back 6 months ago when we were waiving its inspection left and right, I just know in another 6 months to 2 years, we're gonna have disclosure issues pop up. And we're going to go back and we're going to have buyer waives inspection written in the purchase contract. But there's going to be a lot of people that did not sign this right here. So we're still going to have some liability in that. So as soon as that buyer says, no, I don't need an inspector, or no, I don't want to do an inspection, you say, you know what? That's cool. That's your decision. Know that I recommend getting an inspection and I have a document for you to sign. Here it is.
Have you seen buyers sign this before?
Absolutely. All the time. When buyers, a lot of institutional buyers, I will require them to sign this part, because they don't want to hire an inspector. They're just going to buy it and rent it out, or this is also, notice the phraseology in here. Obtain inspections of the premise by qualified inspector, right? How many people on this call have represented buyers that are like, I'm a handyman, or I'm a contractor. I don't need an inspector out here, so I'm going to go look at it myself, right? They are inspecting the premise, but they're not hiring a qualified inspector, right? So you have them sign this right here, noting that, like, I just want you to know you should hire a qualified general inspector. I understand you feel like you can do it. I just need you to sign this document knowing that I have told you you should hire a qualified inspector, and you're declining that capacity. Right? Signing this section right here does not mean that they don't get to ask for anything in the Binzer. Right? So they could still put in here, buyer elects the seller an opportunity to correct these things, fix the roof, change the GFCI outlet, whatever. They can still put those things in here. This down here is signing away the fact that they did not hire an inspector and have an actual official qualified inspection of the house. Everybody follow that along pretty well? I know we're delving away from limited rep, but this is something that is going to be torn apart if you are actual dual agent and there's no inspection. You're going to be like, oh, did you have this thing, this document, this part of the Binzer signed? Did you have anything recognizing that the buyer was advised to hire an inspector and they specifically chose not to? That's what this section right here does. And yes, we see that a lot, see that all the time. So going back to limited representation, and looks like I'm coming up on my 30 minutes. I want to give you y'all's time back. when you think limited rep or think dual agency, you know, a lot of times our minds, we're all realtors, right? We all focus on the percentages. We're all like, okay, cool, I'm going to make more money. I'm going to do some more work, but I'm going to make more money. No, also we want to limit your exposure and your liability. We're going to want more paperwork, right? More memorializing of conversations, all of that. So you're not only are you going to have this consent to limited representation form filled out, but gosh, it would be just a great idea to, you know, to PDF your emails and load those into Command, to maybe, you know, download your text conversations back and forth and load those into Command. Because when you increase that risk level, when you increase that as far as what the ADRE our responsibility level up into dual representation or limited rep, it's going to be up to us to prove that we did everything right, not up to the buyer or seller to prove that we did something wrong. So when you think limited rep, think yes, cool, more money and more paperwork. Just know that. All right. What else? What other questions? What other thoughts? Jennifer, David, Logan, I think KWBP, I think that's Marnie. Any other thoughts, comments?
Hey, I have a quick question on
Yes,
the,
talk loud.
oh, sorry.
There we go.
Here we go. So I have a quick question on dual agents when you said there's one person who would not be able to, there's one restriction, and it is if the owner is an agent.
If the agent that's dual repping is also an owner or has some financial tie to that property.
So what does that mean? What if they're married to someone, or what if it's
Same
their
thing.
Same thing?
Yep, you have a financial interest. If you're like, even if you were married to the person, like if that person owned the property before you guys got married and then you got married, right? You now have financial interest in that property. So you have to disclose that, and then that is something that we want to limit as far as single agent, dual agency on a property that you have a financial interest in.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, good question though, because that is a lot of people think like, oh, it's my brother's house. Like, you have to represent that. You have to disclose that. If it fits in that realm of I have to disclose that I'm related in some way to the owner, or I have some sort of interest in this, and it being the brother, your husband, your spouse, your, you know, whatever, that you have some sort of familial tie to it. Once you get there, then we really don't want single licensee, dual agency run there.
It's
Yeah.
a no-no.
It's just an enormous level of risk and the most scrutinized, and will likely be the if something were to happen in the future, it would be the situation in which the biggest holes are punched and the most responsibility will fall on the broker and the agent.
Okay,
So we just want to avoid it.
okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Helps.
Anything else? That was a good question. All right. Well, I'll wrap it up. Let you guys get back to work. Go back to lead gen, Jennifer. And go get some more sales, go get some more stuff. The market is crazy. But it's there. It's flowing. Houses are still being bought and sold. So, you know, go take your market share. All right. Thanks a lot, guys, for hanging on. This will be up on the YouTube channel in a little while. And just holler at me if you ever have any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.
See ya.